main message from the 8th Marikana Massacre Commemoration over the weekend was a demand by the widows and survivors for a personal apology from President Ramaphosa. Now, they believe an apology will help them get closure following the loss of their husbands, brothers and breadwinners, saying it's even more important than financial compensation. So today we ask this: how can victims find healing and reconciliation? Bishop Paul Verryn is the chair of the Church Unity Commission and was part of the Marikana Commemoration. He joins us now via a Zoom link in Johannesburg this morning. Bishop Verryn, thank you very much for your time on the AM report. Let's perhaps start here, and take a look back, as we have done over the past weekend, to that day 8 years ago. And how do we understand the systems that were in place that resulted in that massacre taking place in the first place?
Well, I suppose the first thing is that, and it was certainly said yesterday, that there was an unleashing of power that was unacceptable in a new democratic South Africa. I'm aware of people who were desperately trying to avoid what ultimately happened. And clearly one has to take cognizance of the fact that the temperature on the ground had risen to a very dangerous level. And so, for instance, Joseph Matunjwa and Josie Walker, the Bishop of Pretoria then, had tried to intervene and tried to mediate that there would not be the kind of violence that ultimately did happen. Because they recognized that the plea for the raising of their salaries and the determination of the workers not to continue in what they felt was an unfair distribution of resources, basically, could end up in a violent confrontation, which ultimately then did happen.
Yeah. I mean, when we reflect on the Marikana Massacre, as we do so often on another stain of our democracy, the Life Isidimeni tragedy, in when those mentally ill patients were moved, and many of them had been living in appalling conditions, many of them dying in just the most horrendous conditions. It's the same feeling we get when we commemorate Marikana, in that the government response just hasn't been enough. Our reporters over the past few weeks in preparing for this commemoration have spent some time in Marikana, and I mean, the conditions, for one, in which the people in Nkaneng, one area in Marikana, that they live, just disgraceful. No proper sanitation, no electricity, no proper health facilities, the roads there are inaccessible. One just gets the sense that there isn't enough, just in terms of a government response to what happened in that area, and the ground there should be sacred. Should government, in your view, Bishop Verryn, not have been taking every step possible to ensure that the people of Marikana are taken care of?
Absolutely, absolutely. I visited Nkaneng. I was asked to come to Nkaneng towards the end of last year. And exactly what you're saying is the truth. And let me just say to you that those conditions have been there from before Marikana. In actual fact, if you go to the ground, there are places where sewage is in actual fact lying on the ground. Last year I went there with a journalist, Kevin Harris, and I mean, it was disgraceful, because pigs were wallowing in the mud on that very ground. There is very little attention to early childhood development. And then if you look at the mining houses, which really are paid for by the very people who work on the mines, and the squalor, the comparison to the squalor in which they live, Well, actually, it's quite disgraceful. And all along that platinum belt, I was with the mayor of Madibeng a few years ago, and at that stage, between Brits and the Rustenburg municipality, there were 138 informal settlements. Now, you can't look at the city of Johannesburg and the developments that have come to a large degree from mining income and not think that something far, far more suitable could have been put in place. I mean, you can imagine working down a hole for 8 hours a day and coming out of that into completely inadequate facilities. Not proper toilets, not proper roads, actually quite dangerous conditions from just a health perspective. And if you actually think of what COVID has exposed, just in terms of food security in South Africa, the fields around Inkaneng and around those informal settlements could be developed into vegetable gardens so that at least there isn't the anxiety of having to scrounge for every part of their survival.
Bishop Verryn, you talk about COVID-19, and that brings me to my next question. On Saturday, the President addressing the nation on the risk-adjusted strategy for our lockdown. That was Saturday evening as we were all counting down to the 8th commemoration of Marikana. And not a word from the President on the Marikana Massacre. Your take on that, and if you look at it side by side with what the victims and the survivors of the massacre are now asking for, and that is an apology from President Ramaphosa, or that he will face legal action?
It's interesting you should ask me this question, because yesterday the service that was held in Midrand was very somber. There was a tangible sadness in the church, and you could feel the impact of the loss that those families have experienced. And I would want to urge that somehow a far more sensitive and a far deeper engagement with the community must happen. And actually not just by Mr. Ramaphosa, but also by the mining companies that are also responsible for some of this. And then the people who held guns in their hands, the public representatives of those people should be in some space with those who mourn and try to bring some healing. Because I can tell you from what I saw yesterday, it's not a vindictive audience. There was a real vulnerability still present in them. Many of those people have lost the reason to live, if I've got to be quite honest with you. Their breadwinner has gone. They don't have places to go to. Amku yesterday mentioned as well that they have decided that for the widows they are going to be sure that they are going to build houses for them. But a house and money and the rest of that stuff does not take away the pain. It doesn't heal the wound. And I think we've done it before in this country, so we have access in our intellect, in our emotional intellect, to make the journey. Clearly the Farnham Commission did not meet the needs of the people. What is needed is an attempt to recognize that we live in a country where this kind of thing is possible.
Yeah.
I've been in a community, for instance, on the East Rand called Happiness Village, which is in Marivale. And there, the treatment by the military of some very vulnerable people. There have been suicides, and there have been people who have died from tension, from being harassed, and some even under house arrest, without any court order. And it's again, we are needing to watch very carefully what we do with power. Indeed. And how, when we are in power, we can cause profound, irreparable damage to people.